Hello and welcome to the first day of a new Premodern. Premodern has woken up to new days. Ironically, when Lantax got banned, I was in the middle of recording Spike Colony podcast with Sam Black. The Tide ban happened as I'm playing Esper Psychotog for YouTube. Got a list I really liked. I was like, I'm going to talk about Psychotog this week. It's going to be fun. I'm going to talk about cutting duress from Psychotog. Nope! Not going to talk about any of that. We are going to talk about Parallax Tide banned in Premodern, effective immediately. I'm going to read the first two the first two sections of this really quick, because I haven't read it yet, just to put it into my brain.
The current time is 12:40. This came in, 40 minutes ago?
Something like that, yeah. The change is effective immediately. Parallax Tide is banned. Fine print, ongoing leagues and tournament in the immediate future for deck lists and link exceptions. Check with the organizer. Implemented on January 20th on Magic Online. Summary. Parallax Tide is mainly exploited as a one-sided Armageddon effect. Often, this is enough to practically end the game on the spot, which can be a punishing experience. Parallax Tide has a polarizing effect on the metagame, as it incentivizes other decks to either go under it with fast creature or combo strategies or to play counterspells, the only reliable way to interact with it. Tide also has a strong pull factor, cannibalizing other control strategies. The deck building space is thus significantly constrained. Decks with Parallax Tide make up a sizable share of the field, especially in the quote-unquote winners metagame, thus contributes to homogenizing play patterns in the format. Motivation. The design idea behind Parallax Tide is presumably to exile all lands temporarily. However, the temporarily part can be circumvented in either of two ways. First, by playing Stifle on the leaves the battlefield trigger, which returns the lands. Second, by resolving said leaves the battlefield trigger before the activated ability, which exiles the land, resolves. This is just the Tide trick. It's hard to read that sentence. This is done by activating an exile. Okay, this is how the Tide trigger works.
Yeah.
We don't need to know this anymore because it's never going to happen again. So this can be done with Chain of Vapor or Seal of Cleansing. It's noteworthy that there's no window for the Tide player's opponent to interact by removing Tide, for example, with a Naturalize. In the first case, if the Tide player doesn't have mana up for Stifle at that point. The ingenuity of using Chain of Vapor to bounce Tide is that it can be deployed again. And if that isn't enough, the Tide player can sacrifice a land to copy Chain to get the opponent's best threat off the table. With up to 5 lands exiled, it can be hard to replay that card again. Chain of Vapor and Seal Cleansing are both useful cards in themselves, so setting up the Tide quote-unquote combo doesn't require a lot of deck building concessions. Stifle is a bit more of a niche card, but since it's already part of a combo with Phyrexian Dreadnought, it creates an incentive to play both Dreadnought and Tide in the same deck. Indeed, in the past couple of years, we've seen several decks operating on the Tide-Dreadnought continuum, often using either card as a sideboard plan. Even not considering the support cards Stifle and Chain of Vapor, the fact that Tide is blue contributes to its strength, both since Tide can be played with counterspell backup, and since blue has plenty of cantrips and filtering to find both Tide and support cards. Nuking 5 lands will hurt any deck, but at 4 mana, or 5 when combined with Chain of Vapor, not all decks are equally vulnerable. Decks that can deploy most of their threats in the first couple turns, like Suicide Black or Sly, and or with alternative mana sources like Elves, are not too bothered by Tide. Slower decks that don't play as much to the board suffer a lot. However, in particular, non-blue decks without access to counterspells. Slower decks that don't play as much of the board suffer a lot. However, in particular, non-blue decks without access to counterspells. Sorry, I'm bad at reading and talking. To be fair, deck archetypes like the Rock, Black-White Controls, and Lands were far from top decks before Tide became popular, but the current prevalence of Tide has constrained this deck space significantly. At the same time, there is a strong pull towards playing Tide in that it begs the question to deck builders such as, is it just better to play Tide than this other payoff, or can I fit Tide in this deck? I like to say that a card like this has a lot of gravity. The clearest example is the formerly quite popular blue-white Landstill control archetype, to a certain extent has been replaced by blue-white Tide control. Mark Eric Vogt was amongst those who developed the archetype as documented, for example, in this podcast. You could, of course, argue that such a clever adaptation of the blue-white archetype is as legit as anything else, but as a matter of subjective judgment, it's a bit sad that, as one player put it to me, you can't seem to play control without Tide. in reality, you can just play things linked to Phil Wynn's excellent article, but you get the point. Then we are going to look at some Tide decks through the history. This is kind of like an in memoriam of things that you can do with Tide. The same thing happened with the land tax article. I see this as a gallery of like, look at the beautiful babies we just murdered. And of course, that is Mono Blue Tide Control, Tide Still, Replenish, and Dreadnought with Tide Sideboard, which I think is like the greatest deck innovation of all time. Then we're going to go into some data, which came from Martin Berlin's sort of 2025 metagame analysis of the data that we have. Basically saying Parallax Tide is super prevalent. Martin Berlin's like a very even-headed guy. I think he's acknowledging the limitations of the data, but basically pointing out that, you know, there are things that obviously point to like whatever. But he's also saying our data is better than we've had before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Looking forward, I anticipate this raises some questions. So what this ban is not. First, a few words to be not read into this ban decision. It's not an attempt to create fair pre-modern, pruning all power outliers one after another. Powerful, splashy build-arounds are intrinsic to Magic design and often make for exciting games and deck building. Beating powerful strategies can also be especially rewarding. Power outliers must always be seen in the context of the decks they're in, how they're played, deck function, etc. Not an attempt to remove any unfun cards or mana denial from the format. Not an attempt to adjust color balance or boost black. And not response to results from Magic Online, but on how the format has evolved during the past couple of years. State of the format overall, Premodern has a healthy metagame. Okay. Even when we zoom in on the winners metagame and big events as above, there is no single deck or strategy currently dominating, and the distribution of viable decks tails off gradually, with Spice, the other category, being quite big, including a lot of different archetypes. The bread and butter of Premodern are still local meetups and smaller events. However, and here I bet that there is every time he uses however, I pronounce it wrong, however, and here I bet that there is even more diversity of decks. The metagame is rather mature, and while it is still a lot of innovation still, it mainly comes in the form of refinements of established archetypes, exemplified by adding Tide to Stifle-Knot, Xantis forming Carpet Flowers to Enchantress, Stifle-Knot adapting further by playing Essence Flare. I personally find such tweaking interesting, but I'll be excited to see if the ban opens up more brewing. What about black? The testing potential unbanned, not conclusive. There's some candidates, but don't want to deal with unbans, which I think makes sense.
I like at the risk of just adding more shit to deal with.
Yeah. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Besides Tide, there's a concern that Dreadnought and Wave. So let's address Dreadnought and Wave. I expect that Dreadnought's going to continue to be the best deck to beat because it is a great deck. We're obviously nerfing it with the Tide planned. This deck can go back to splashing white for Armageddon. Huge fan of that. Core Shell is strong. Also true. Enchantress made a comeback because it can beat Stifle-Knot. Enchantress doesn't like Tide, especially coming from the Replenish deck. So a first order effect of the ban would seem to push Enchantress. It's hard to foresee that happens if the meta starts moving, but I think there's plenty of tools for dealing with Enchantress. Reasonable. Everything's reasonable. It's Martin Berlin. Combination of Wave and Opalescence, utilize both Enchantress and Replenish, is tough to deal with for many decks. Just like in the Tide case, can be repetitive and frustrating. With Replenish losing Tide, we'll see if it's worth building around the control part of Replenish, perhaps with Decree of Silence. Lol Lamau from me. I want to see that. And certainly easier to make a comeback from losing your creatures than losing your lands. You can disrupt double wave with Naturalize. Premodern is on Magic Online. Growing Pains. The metagame does seem more homogenous with Stifle-Knot, collecting around Stifle-Knot and Sly. I've experienced this firsthand. Well, the challenge results just say that. And Magic Online kind of has its own logic with its economy and player population and like whatever. And talking about Tide nostalgia, little Ankh Tide, Phil kind of doing an early Tide combo deck. Lanny Huang, the first person with a recorded result of a Dreadnought main and Tide sideboard deck. Just going to throw that out there. Okay, now we've read the entire article. Let's start back from the top.
Did something happen?
I don't know. Feels like something.
I feel like we need Flores on here to chime in on whether or not Stronghold Stronghold Cabal is playable again.
Oh yeah, right. Flores is pre-releasing right now. His loss.
Okay. Man.
I mean, this is why you don't pre-release, man. Okay. Parallax Tide is mainly exploited as an Armageddon effect. Ends the game on the spot, which can be punishing. It has a polarizing effect on the metagame. It incentivizes fast strategies. And it cannibalizes other control strategies. I don't think anybody on this call has a disagreement with the idea that the metagame is Tide decks that can be Tide, and people still clinging onto decks that get annihilated by Parallax Tide. Like, it is clearly a pillar of the format. It has been for going on 2 years. We all agree.
Well, yeah? I agree with that, but I think there's also just 20% of people play whatever they want to play.
Yeah. I mean, that's the people who get annihilated, right? And it's okay to get annihilated if, whatever Tide is like 1% or 5% of the metagame. It's like more closer to maybe 20% of the metagame, depending on where you are, right? If you're on a weekly, not a lot of Tide. If you're playing a Magic Online League, not a lot of time. If you're playing a Magic Online Challenge, actually, still, I played 7 matches in the challenge, and I made it to the top 8. And I played against Dreadnought, didn't get tided, just got Dreadnoughted. I was playing Enchantress, by the way, so I was doing the thing that I was supposed to do. That's on YouTube, I don't know, like today. But let's talk about cannibalizing other control strategies. This is in the first paragraph of the thing. So Martin Berlin seems to think that it is quite important that Parallax Tide cannibalizes other control strategies. The deck building space becomes significantly constrained, and you kind of get this homogenizing effect on this. So my position is that control strategies are not entitled to existence. Like, a control strategy exists if it's good, and if it sucks because it has to play Parallax Tide or it can't defeat the card Parallax Tide, like, them's the breaks. Like, I do not think that a style like what I will lovingly call a removal deck is like something that has to exist. Like, I think that, somebody bemoaning the fact that they can't play Fact or Fiction blue cards without playing Tide in their deck, one is like a little bit disappointing because they can, and I've seen it done, and I think that there are like exploitative trade-offs or vibe trade-offs, which are interesting to make. And I think that it is lame to like be in a position where you're brewing a deck and you think that you can't just play things, as Phil Wynn puts it, but actually that you are strategically prevented from playing things because that is the puzzle. Like, I try to build very, very competitive decks. I try to build the most powerful deck that I possibly can, even if it's Esper Bobs, even if it's 5-color survival, even if it's Grotog. Like, I'm building the best version of the deck because I have a hypothesis that not playing these pillars, not playing Dreadnought, not playing Tide, Replenish, like whatever, gives me an advantage. And I have the tools to address that. Like, this I think is metagaming. I think this is like at the heart of competitive Magic. So this is the sentence, which I don't like, which is, why do we think that cannibalizing control is necessarily a bad thing? Take it away.
I think Phil should take this. Phil's the control guy.
Yeah, as a control guy, I agree that like there's no archetype or macro type that is entitled to existence. I think when I read the sentence of it is absorbing another macro type into its player, like what would otherwise see play if it didn't exist, is more so leaning on is this card constraining a bunch of other cards that would see play otherwise if it wasn't for this singular factor. I think about that a lot with Legacy. I've been thinking about that more with Vintage. There's like, whenever cards like sort of give you where your your guardrails are on a format, like where they're capped at. It's like, well, you can't venture out of here without voluntarily taking a concession, whether it's on power level, like competitive viability. In some way, you are voluntarily making a concession to be softer in a competitive field because this thing is the guardrail upon which you have to make that choice. And I think that I remember whose podcast was I listening to, but I remember they were talking about, oh yeah, you would be able to solve all of the waves if you just tacked on the activate only as a sorcery the way that Parallax Nexus does, and then you couldn't actually do all of the things that make this card like away from like the design intent that it had, right? But I think that like I agree with Lenny. I don't think that like control needs to exist, but I think that the choice of banning something like Tide is more indicative that like it will release the floodgates of a bunch of other cards that would have seen play or could see play that were just sort of guardrailed out because of its existence.
Is there an example of a card that you want to throw in there?
This is actually like I'm trying to think of like if there's another one for Premodern. I was thinking about this because Zach and I were talking about it for our Durdles podcast, where I'd written an article about Bowmasters in Legacy and how like a bunch of cards just can't see play because of it. Even if it's not seeing like the most play, or if it like teeters off because like people like recognize that because people are playing around it, now we can like sort of shave those numbers. I think that like for this one, it's like I don't know if you could put like where land tax was in a similar space. I also think that like Parallax Tide was just like released in the same way that like when land tax went.
The land tax, man. This was debated, or actually you guys were debating this on your YouTube channel. So everyone check out the somewhat prescient
last week, last Friday.
Video from Eternal Durdles. I think that there were Tide decks. I actually played land tax against Tide at LobsterCon 2023, and it was a blue-white Tide deck. And at the time, the individual that I played against thought that their blue-white Tide deck would beat the blue-white landstill decks that were trying to prey upon the parfait decks. And I'm like, you have gone too deep, brother. Like, nobody's playing parfait here. Like, they're just playing burn and like their cool deck. Like, you can't. And so I decked him in game 1 in 50 minutes, and then that was the game. Andy, you were about to say something. Does anybody else want to throw like chat is like black white control is back on the menu, which I think is interesting because black white control was a deck that seemed to be reasonable into Dreadnought, even with the Tide plan, depending on the Dreadnought style. Like if it was like the AK Dreadnought, you could probably get grounded out. Obviously, Tide embarrasses Eternal Dragon, so Eternal Dragon is back on the menu, sort of. But
that's sort of one of the things that I wanted to point out is that. So I take the opposite stance of you and Phil. I do think that control deserves to be in every format. I think that every format should have not an equal distribution of deck archetypes, but at least some representation of deck archetypes. But I think if anything, so I've got it here. The Brewers Award from the Order of the Sacred Torch event, right? I did play a non-Tide control deck. I played like a blue-white Phoenix browse deck. But the point that I wanted to make here,
blue-red. It was a blue-red.
Blue-red browse control deck. Decks like that are back on the menu, but specifically, you're saying black-white control is back. Go get your Thawing Glaciers right now. Thawing Glaciers is a card you're allowed to play.
I'm going to stop you right there. It's not going to happen.
Thawing Glaciers is a card you can play.
There's still Sabo's Web, Wasteland, Armageddon. Like just.
Yeah, I think two things is like one. I think people are overreacting about like decks that folded to mana denial being viable again. Like there's still a lot of mana denial.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll put on my Billy Mills current hat. Armageddon is still a thing. Terrageddon, like there's still plenty of ways. So I think like where black white control is probably still not the most viable if Armageddon is still a force in the meta. Same with like things like Rifter. I do think I saw Fran was posting like I agree Oath Panza. This sounds really good for. I think the tides were what really drove it out from like
That's a
dominance.
yikes from me, dog. You ever try to build
there
a
are
deck that
also a
tries
lot
to
of
beat
viable-
Sphere of Resistance, Oath of Druids, Stone Rain?
I would like to speak in on this point. Web just cleans it all up. Every color replaces itself. You can play with welders. There exists.
You can play with welders.
Yeah, there exists.
You know
no
what
such
card welder,
answer.
Goblin
Well,
Welder
that is
triggers
great
in the
against
Oath
tides.
Ponza deck? that is pretty good.
What card? I don't know.
It's Oath of Druids. It's Oath of Druids. It's in the
Oh
name.
yeah, that is
Yeah.
Well
that
said.
doesn't make
Well
sense.
said. Yeah. Yep. And you can pyroclasm it away, but there was no such like clean and accessible, like if you woke up that morning and you're like, I'm sick of player XYZ's malarkey, I will.
Yeah, you would just put you would put 4 Sabo's webs. This
Yeah.
to me is kind of like a specific kind of cope that I don't particularly enjoy, which is just like the you can sideboard against this deck idea, because there's kind of 2 things happening. One is like, okay, I'm trying to play exploitatively, right? That's the kind of like I show up to the meetup and everybody's getting their warm-up games in. Everybody's got mountains up, right? And you're like, oh, time to slide those circle of protections right into my sideboard. So same thing, like, you know, the New York meetup before the big New Jersey tournament, I'm going to roll up to meetup and I'm going to be like, oh, like everyone's, I see Bill here. I see Luis Neiman here. Billy drove all the way in. He was working in Long Island. He came in. I'm just like 4 Sabo's weapon to the sideboard thing.
So
and that,
use the term, please.
And that to me is not something that like feels like an experience that has to be protected by, like, has to be protected within the metagame. Because the simple answer to that, right, is basically what Flores did, which was he won his like little 3-rounder, and he just kind of had a read that, you know, Elves was going to be good. And so like the idea that, you know, your deck can beat X deck because you put sideboard cards in it isn't really a deck building thing to me, because, you know, your deck needs to exist for longer than one tournament, right? And so it's either right for your deck to contain Sabo's Web, which was seemingly the case with Replenish, right? Like when we actually, like we had this metagame before, right? We had this metagame before Tide Knot existed, which was Replenish needed to find a way to get up to 4 mana to ever cast Replenish, and it would do that by casting Sabo's Web. And it made sense in Replenish. But it wasn't like Elves could play, you know, Elves wanted to play Sabo's Web because it would be like a dumpster. So what you're kind of protecting is like the experience of this person who's playing some deck that gets clowned on by Rishton Port and Wasteland, and they're like, well, I'm going to play like 4 Sabo's Web, and then that actually unbalances their deck, and then they're like not good against other decks in the meta, but they crush Oath Ponza because they have this like mulligan to Sabo's Web strategy, and it kind of falls apart from a strategic level. And I don't really believe in being like, oh, well, this deck is quote unquote fine because somebody can just put cards into their favorite deck to beat that specific deck, because I just don't think that's like a thing that actually happens when you like play Premodern from week to week over a long period of time.
So this reminds me of like a legal concept of the value of predictability. Like the law is not always just or fair, but we have this concept of a predictable public legal system, so that, well, you know, XYZ isn't fair, but I know that these books are public, and there's like contract law and torts and so on and so forth, so that citizens in a society know what to expect, so that at least they don't buy into a concept or a set of behaviors that could be punishing or incur losses or something like that. So I perceive that one of the strengths of Premodern is the like ultra vicious sideboard cards. So although I think I did not object, but disagree with the premise of sideboarding these like specific hate cards as a cope. I think that this is the primary vehicle of agency that people get to play the decks they want to play. Like I get to continue a set of I get to play a strategy that I have some sort of ego investment with, which I do that. I'm like super public about being Mr. Terror. That's a part of my player identity. And if I cannot make mild concessions, like, I don't know, splashing red for Pyroclasm and Red Blast, then I have to separate myself from this thing that brings me joy. And it's like, it's intensely frustrating to feel that I can't, I should get punished for being hyper Terravore. Well, if I make some concessions and I devote 4-6 cards to some outrageously bad matchup, then I'm still able to play within this like deck building identity. I don't need to buy new cards. I can just make some concessions as opposed to abandoning a primary deck identity, which was a loss for me.
Can I? I also want to say, as somebody who is totally I can't relate to somebody who dedicates themselves entirely to one archetype for the entirety of their life. That's a strange concept to me. I've never done it before. But I think that like the big thing that stood out to me with what Martin said. Also, that's a joke for anybody watching that doesn't know.
Yeah, where's your miracles, Jack?
Okay. I have a quick question, which is, what if I'm Andy Levine and I'm just a exaggerated version of Andy Levine, and actually I devoted my entire personality to Tide decks, right?
That's a loss.
I'm actually quite hedged on replenish here. Like, I have a slabbed attunement that Andy gave me as a gift to remind me of the time that I thought the card was disgustingly unplayable, and then instead it just turns out that it hurts me every time I activate it. And like, this is actually wiped away. Like, replenish is a huge part of my pre-modern identity, right? And like, the reason it is was because it was a good deck, and it was like a competitive deck that, like, because I prioritized like winning matches of Magic and finding creative problem solutions, like, replenish gets to exist because it's good. Whether or not Terrageddon exists is entirely up to your ability to do this thing. And if you get to a point where you are unable to adapt to the metagame, then you fall out of the metagame. That is how metagames work. Like, I played Grotog recently. I ran into 2 black mid-range decks and I got annihilated. I dropped the league and I was like, all right, Grotog is going on the shelf. This Mox Diamond card, I can't play it. Like, I just don't believe in the thing that you're saying, which is that we have to protect like the one tricks, because like people one trick the most ridiculous decks out there. Like, I don't. I'm not going to be like, oh.
I'm not stating that we need to protect one tricks. What I'm stating is that it is why I brought up like the legalistic concept was that Tide was rather uniquely resistant to common sideboard I
understand. So let's set that aside then. Let's just say let's say the thing that you're saying is different from the thing that I'm saying. I'm saying that you have no entitlement to play the decks that you want and the cards that you want and win. You are required to win using your ingenuity, your creativity, your problem solving ability, and like the cards. Like, we play tournaments. Tournaments have winners. You can just do things. You can just play whatever you want, but you're not entitled to winning. The other thing which you're saying is more of sort of a transitional topic, which is the sort of vibe of a card grounds for a banning. I think that this was something that was the one sort of critical comment that really hit me with the discussion with Flint when Lantax got banned. And he said the sort of pastiche, the culture of Premodern had turned on Lantax. Like, Lantax had sort of worn out its welcome, and that there were just simply enough players who were sick of it, that didn't want to deal with it. Even if you could answer it, even if it only had like whatever win rate, like, they just didn't want to see it across from the table for them. And the vibe had just like completely shifted. And so it had become an intersection of, it's enough of the metagame and it's enough of a bad experience that like whatever. And so the thing that you're saying is like more about the psychological experience of being like, oh, Parallax Tide is an enchantment. I can put enchantment removal in my green or white deck. Why don't I just do that? And then your opponent explains to you that you can't do that. And you're like, oh, well, I hate my life. Like, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to play Like
Almost.
I'm supposed to play Abeyance or whatever. Like
Almost. So it's not so much specifically artifact or enchantment hate. It's that the mechanisms by which players normally expect to protect their ego identifying deck, that it became so narrow that produced frustration for me. So like I said, go ahead, Phil, please.
Sorry, I don't mean to. Before the concept is lost, of what Lanny was saying about the creativity and the ingenuity of trying to solve a problem. I think that, like, on my personal stake, I'm really surprised that this ban happened suddenly. But I think that the rationale that Martin used is sort of fortifying the idea of the creativity and ingenuity, because I think that the removal of Parallax Tide, he's arguing, will make it so that there's more creativity and ingenuity available in the format. So, like, you could look for, like, the creativity and ingenuity of ways to try and solve Parallax Tide, but that, like what Billy's saying, is so narrow comparatively to if it's just not around, and then it opens up what we were talking about before with, like, it opens up the format so that the guardrails of the format become wider.
Yeah. I agree with the idea behind this. I think that the question is the confidence interval that's a thing that's going to actually happen. As you identified in your YouTube video, like, Parfait left and Oathponza effectively replaced it. It did a lot. It attacked on a lot of the same angles, and it became like the red green oath deck was like a menace. Like I think people sort of forget this period of time from January of 2024 up until LobsterCon, where it was just like a really, really excellent deck that was very, very difficult to attack with like a wide range of strategies. The ways that you attacked it were kind of like this black-white control Eternal Dragon deck. You had like Replenish putting 2 Sabo's Web in the main deck. Like, you know, I was deck built like it's actually kind of funny. When I was deck building post land tax ban, I still felt basically oppressed even by the concept of the deck when it was just Sphere Resistance and Cataclysm, and I called it the green-white Oath Plush deck. So like the idea that it opens up creativity because it has to be like tied out, you know, takes like it needs to we need to be able to move from this place where you kind of have an idea, like these ideas that are living in this equilibrium, right? And you're trying to say like, okay, well, we're going to take this one out from the top, and there's going to be like a rearrangement where ideas start coming back, right? And they start kind of like flood in, and then they create this sort of new equilibrium that is less concentrated, less like more disparate, more like, you know, interesting, more imbalanced. And I think that that's possible. I think that if that doesn't happen, which is in my mind a thing that like didn't happen with the land tax ban, like not fully, it's tough because the land, like after the land tax ban happened at like we're on this like pre-modern growth trajectory where more and more people keep on coming into the format and building new decks, right? The Magic Online thing is crazy because people are just like putting cards in decks that you're just like, of all the OGs like wrote off, right? And we're just like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, and like whatever. And then, you know, Magic Online people are just like, oh, well, I don't know, I remember this card from whatever, I'm just going to put it into my deck because it sounds cool and it gives me good feels. So it's really hard to isolate.
People are playing 21 for God's sakes.
To interject real quick, I think that like comparing the land tax ban to the Parallax Tide ban is a trap, because I think that land tax was banned for vibes, not for power level or keeping other things out.
Okay, yeah.
Where I think that the argument for Parallax Tide is that it is, because if you wanted to do anything else, you'd have to go, well, Parallax Tide is better. I'm voluntarily doing this thing that's not as good as Parallax Tide.
Yeah.
Whereas like there was no argument for that for land tax.
Land tax was a deck and Tide was a tool, basically. Yeah. Okay.
The land tax was like, you know, it takes too long to play games.
Yeah.
Problem.
The comparison, though, at least with Red Green Oath, is that Red Green Oath, the floor of it is the dredge problem in Legacy, where if like you see 2 of the dredge homies that you know have the deck built, you just go like, okay, for Leyline of the Void in my, I don't know, burn deck, who cares? And that you have the same cyclical nature of just like, I keep these in my glove compartment, baby. You're not stealing this 4-0 from me. And that's the floor of the Red Green Oath deck. With Tide, there is not the same cyclical or like immediate responsiveness where you have to like change strategies. And I'm not asserting that any strategy, even Terravore, has a right to exist. Terravore earned it, by the way. It doesn't. You don't have a right to exist, but at least you have the ability to cling on by just being like, okay, two web side, two web main. Like, this is my concession so that I can play, I don't know, blue-green shitters or whatever.
Where I disagree is I think you might be undervaluing the power level of like good sideboard cards against Tide. Like, I think Tide, like any green deck, if they wanted to, could beat Tide.
Sure.
With like 5 or 6 sideboard cards, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think we accept that out of Burn. Like, in order for a deck to beat Burn, you might need 5 or 6 sideboard cards, but we don't accept that here. I don't particularly care. Like, I'm fine with this ban. I think it'll be fun.
I think the point about Burn is a great point. Like, it is exactly that, which is just that, like, you know, we are trying to identify the difference of like how much you like get to do a different thing. Like, I don't want to necessarily minimize this, because I definitely understand, right? There's a difference between putting extra Zern orbs and warmths and chills or whatever into your sideboard and not doing the dredge thing, doing like the whatever, and just being like, I'm rolling up and I've got elves if I see the Tide players, and I've got, you know, black-white control if I don't see the Tide players. So I do think that those things are different, and I do think that the difference has some amount of meaningful value. I question stacking up the difference of like that value versus kind of the value that I see of, like, you know, Premodern is sort of a sort of like slow, like sort of difficult problem that that doesn't change very often, and that like finding new angles is difficult. Like one of the analogies I make is just like, it's like finding new prime numbers, right? Each prime number is more difficult to find than the last, right? So each new deck you find is more difficult to find than the last. So don't get me wrong, I love the idea that I'm gonna like wake up tomorrow and everything's just exploded, right? And now I get to be like, oh, time to do prime numbers again. 2, boom. 3, easy. That was easy. And I can come up with a bunch.
17.
Right? Yeah, I don't have to think of one that's like 1,000 digits, and I'm like, oh shoot, what's the next viable prime number? So like I'm into that, but like that's the thing is like I that's to me is the difference, is just that like how difficult it is. Like we're gonna find all the easy prime numbers again, and then we're just going to find ourselves in the exact same spot if, like, when we're talking about the value of sort of flexible deck building, because I fundamentally do not believe that the TGED guys or the guys that just get annihilated by XYZ deck, they always exist, because there's always beautiful, beautiful decks that are just struggling to just hang in there and be like somewhere near the metagame, and people love those decks. So, you know, maybe it's black-white control and the rock and that kind of stuff, and land still, like whatever, like all these decks, like that. Don't get me wrong, people who make their whole personality those decks, they're rejoicing, right? But there's just going to be a new like thing in a year from now, like some brewer is going to come up with something really, really awesome. Maybe this LobsterCon, maybe next LobsterCon, and we'll be right back in this exact same place where somebody is just like, oh, well, you know, what about me, man? Like, I love Grotog, and like Oathponza is just annihilates Grotog, and there's not really actually that much I can do about it, because, you know, fundamentally I have Mox Diamond in my deck, and it's like a card that doesn't do anything, and it discards a land, which I need to put onto the battlefield type stuff. So like, These are
being in that place again isn't bad.
At least the person, at least we know that person, or rather, at least we are taking a chance that the new best deck is a deck that you can cast your spells against. Like, mass counter spells paired with mass land destruction so this is a vibes based argument. Like,
casting your spells feels good. Yeah.
Getting
Stone Rain doesn't feel good.
Exactly. Like, let's say I come up with like some outrageous, I don't know, replenish Panda Burst deck. I don't know. Like, every once in a while.
Come up with, by the way.
Yeah. Somebody else came up with it. Yeah. Somebody else came up with it. But like, you know, sometimes I'm gonna get like turn 2 Ancient Tomb, Frantic Search, untap, LED, Burning Wish for replenish. Like, and I'm gonna get to do the thing. And we know that that is less possible with a tied best deck, just like counterspell, chain tied chain is just.
Are you generally against mana denial then? Because like you have similar or worse play patterns playing against Oath Panza.
Oh, certainly. I am not against land destruction. I am against a multifaceted bad vibe situation.
But isn't that like the Oath Panza deck too? Because like turn 1 Sphere of Resistance, Wasteland.
Sure.
Well, so
Like-
I'll stop you there, Andy. Like, evidently, I agree with you because I don't feel bad like when I get tided as compared to when I lose a match of Magic for any other reason. I feel bad losing matches of Magic, and I feel good winning matches of Magic. So that's all that matters to me. How I lose and how I win. Like, I personally just don't experience the like, oh, that was like I lost, but that was like, you know, a great match compared to like, you know, all that matters is like, oh, I got mana screwed or whatever, or like my cards came in the wrong order. Like that's when it's bad, right? Like my opponent's strategy doesn't really figure into it. Like I played Psychotog against Madness today and I lost. I'm like, I love the Madness deck. I don't feel bad. But if it was Psychotog against Replenish, like same thing, really interesting. And granted, Psychotog has a lot of game against Tide decks. So like, but this is me adapting to the situation because I play a deck that doesn't get annihilated by Tide and doesn't make it simple, right?
I think that's a point of introspection. I think that like a good chunk of the pre-modern community, myself included, do really care about the agency experience, whether or not a game is won or lost, because there is a means by which this format allows for expression in deck building and experience of play that other formats in Magic have wholly lost or conceded to, like selling power.
Yeah. But so, we're very distant from that. I would like to isolate that just because like we are so far from that, and we have that with Parallax Tide. So without it, I don't know if it's evidently clear to me that like Parallax Tide is as oppressive as Oko, right?
I'm saying that this is all like this is stages of a thing. So like when you were saying like we could end up here again in a year. I think that like the growth and experience between now and whatever it looks like a year from now, who we are and the experiences that we're having a year from now are going to be different from now. And it's okay to talk about whatever that experience is and if it needs correcting then, because the future is different from where we are now. And we don't need to prevent like what happens in the future because we're taking action. You know what I mean? Like the
I agree that like there like the two sides of it are basically like, I don't want to ban one card every 3 years even, right? Because land tax ban was a long ass time ago now. I don't even want to ban one card every 3 years. Because to me, like pre-modern as a static format, as a closed experience, as a box set, like, you know, like the 2023 edition and the 2025 edition, or the 2023 edition and the 2026 edition being like the same, like does not bother me, right? Like that's like kind of the thing. And I do think that I am sort of on a very, very far end extreme of like the spectrum of people who enjoy pre-modern for various experience. And so if you told somebody else that the draw is like, oh, actually we have the format and like, you know, we are not obligated to ban cards like Tax and Parallax Tide, but if we do, we might just get a little bit more juice out of the lemon. We might just be able to like squeeze a little bit harder and have a little bit more fun in these in-between moments. Like that's kind of the thing is like, I'm also, one of the things is like people will like to say, myself included, will be like the complainers are always going to complain, but the me's are also just going to continue doing me, right? I'm not going to quit pre-modern. I'm like, whatever. I'm kind of sad about this and annoyed and like whatever, but I'm going to keep I'm going to keep participating in this thing. So in much the same way, I'm not trying to say like, you know, my opinion is necessarily more valuable than the next. And I do think, and I actually am like a more of like a pro complainer kind of person because, you know, voicing your feedback is important and expressing your point of view is important. And like, you know, one of the things that I would always say is just like your deck is not entitled to exist, but your point of view and your feelings about a thing are, of course, entitled to exist. You are allowed to feel exactly how you feel about a format. And like, look, if a bunch of people are like don't want to play pre-modern with me because they're not interested in this Parallax Tide thing, like I guess I have to let it go. And that again, that happened. The dimension of the land tax article, land tax ban on, style or power level or like whatever is different, but the vibes are roughly similar. The people had sort of turned on Tide, and that's kind of what I'm going to sort of keep coming back to, which is just like, I want people to be happy when they play Premodern. And like, if this was really making them unhappy, sometimes you just got to make some concessions in a healthy marriage, right?
I think the turn on Tide, I think like the progression of people getting tired of Tide to where it became like, to get to this point, like I'm surprised by this ban today. Like I didn't think that it was going to happen, or it would have ever really happened. But like then looking at the data that Martin put in, and then like actually assessing it, like, okay, if you actually were thinking you're going to take action against this card, like what is the rationale for it? And I think it's redundancy of experience across a bunch of different archetypes. Like if you're like, okay, I have to prepare for Dreadnought, and I have to prepare for Replenish, and I have to prepare for Mono Blue Tide, and I have to prepare for Standstill Tide, and I have to, like, there's all of these different decks that. What's that?
Don't forget Stifle Knot.
I said Stifle Knot was the first thing I said, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but also yes, of course, Stifle Knot. Like there are all these different decks that require different tools that all have different experiences of play when you're sitting across from them, and then they all just come to the same focal point of they all then do Tide, and Tide is always doing the same thing in all of them. Tide's not doing anything different depending on which one you do it in, whether you reanimate it, whether you just cast it, like, but ultimately what Tide is doing is what Tide is doing. And so all of these decks then converge into Tide if they want to pivot into that plan, because it by itself becomes a whole plan that can win games. And so if you're sitting across, you're like, well, I lost a Stifle Knot, but really I lost a Tide, or I lost a Replenish, but really it was just Tide. And then, so like, you can have a whole day where you're like, your experience throughout is just like, well, I thought I was prepared for these decks, but then ultimately it was Tide. And so like, you can then try and prepare for Tide, but then you lose to the other parts of these decks because this one incident, like individual tool is so powerful across them. And so then the experience of what you're losing to or what you're playing against becomes this redundant piece. And so then it becomes a target.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, and especially hearing, I think that because you guys have sort of the legacy background, and this is something I'm like less familiar with this game of like, Deathrite Shaman type stuff.
Well,
or
here's like the current example, which is like a really easy parallel, and why it's really easy to like get lost in the sauce of like all these different archetypes supposedly being different. If you were to look at Legacy right now, you have Dimir Tempo in the last challenge. There was Dimir Tempo, there was Bug Midrange, there was Grixis Control. They were listed as these decks in the
challenge, and they're all the same deck.
Release. Yeah, they're all the same deck. They're all Tameo, Bowmaster, Wasteland Days. They're all the exact same cards. So like you could present like, oh, I'm sitting across from all these different archetypes. No, you're not. It's the same. It's the same.
And
card.
Tameo is the card they want to get rid of, right? Or like, what's the most plausible card to ban from this core?
Tameo.
Yeah, okay.
Probably Tameo.
And it's interesting because like obviously Force of Will is in every Legacy deck and is like a definer of the format, but the thing that we don't like is proactive cards that are too good. Reactive cards, and even Orcish Bowmasters is like a reactive / prison card, right? Like get a little bit less heat than proactive cards that kind of like decide the game.
No, I not proactive, prophylactic. Cards that preclude you from having any shit to say about shit. Like that's
I feel like you have plenty of things to say about Tameo in this analogy, at least.
If you
Tameo's
do,
overpowered,
and your opponent brainstorms in response, then you don't have anything to say about it. That's one of the issues with that.
Okay.
But
brainstorm isn't on the table for banning.
No. But that's the thing. But like that the whole idea that brainstorm isn't on the table for banning. Yeah, neither is survival of the fittest in Premodern. Neither is
hold on. Survival is on the table, my friend. That card is really good. Why is it not on the table? Survival is absurdly good.
Of course it's good, but like has there been any communal talk that like survival ever needs to go?
Yeah,
in the same way that there was with
there are certain
cards like
in the time before the time where we're at, Elves was like the equivalent of like the deck that everybody felt whatever. But we're talking,
in which case Gaia's Cradle, right? Like the notion of like in certain formats.
I mean, people discuss hitting a lot of things, and I do think that like you're sort of identifying that Gaia's Cradle kind of fuels the survival engine, and then you can have all these other survival decks, and they're pretty fair so long as they don't pop up with Gaia's Cradle. I think Elves is still like obviously absurd without Guy's Cradle, but
Yeah.
I don't want to get too deep into that. I think that
No. The argument that I wanted to make on that topic was, if you're looking at Tameo Brainstorm in that analogy and being like, well, yeah, Brainstorm's obviously the power outlier there that should go because it's causing these.
Oh no, I think that
I'm using it as an analogy. I'm saying that Brainstorm is like just universally accepted that like that's where like Brainstorm gets to live in Legacy, and other things will die for Brainstorm sins if it has to. And in Premodern, there are the power outliers that are allowed to exist, like Oath of Druids and Survival of the Fittest, and these things that like we all know they're power outliers. We know that they're the most powerful things to do in the format, but they get to live here, and everybody has accepted that like these are the power outliers that we're willing to embrace. And if Parallax Tide is not one of them,
I think people will very quickly turn on any card that is in the format as a power outlier, should the environment create for it. Like, I think...
But by power outlier, do we just mean something that's protected here? I think that's the proxy that we're working with.
No. Yeah, Phil is basically just saying, like, the sort of pillar of the format argument, right? And so, like, people would say that Tide is not a pillar of the format, and that made it very easy to ban. But like Oath is going to be hard to ban because it's a pillar of the format, or Survival is going to be hard to ban because it's a pillar of the format, or Phyrexian Dreadnought is going to be hard to ban because it's a pillar of the format. Like, I think that, like, honest to God, I think that Phyrexian Dreadnought like is the card that should be banned, and I do think that it got a pass here because of its sort of format defining identity, and because there's 1,000 YouTube videos up that I would hate to be useless now but there's like 1,000 YouTube videos, but that, so like, okay, do you guys want to talk about format pillars? Is this an interesting thing? Because to me it kind of feels like it's like, it's like this other thing which is sort of just
my comment on like where it gets to live is more so in the vibes based space, which I think Premodern's pretty deep in. And if there's something that's like egregiously powerful, and we all understand that, but the vibes around the card are like people enjoy it and it's fun, and there's like agency against it, even if it's like the most powerful thing that your opponent is doing or that you're doing, that like it's communally more accepted, even though we all know that it shouldn't actually be there.
Yeah, it has some function. I mean, it's I guess it's an interesting thing. I think that like, it's these elements are intersecting very interestingly, which is sort of the Tide metagame share, which was like high and across multiple decks. Its lack of community support from I love playing these decks, because like the people who played Tide decks were just all sickos, and like they knew they were sickos.
You and I are in the minority, my guy. You and I love land tax. We want land tax around. Like I wish it were here, but we're also in the minority.
Well, no, we're sickos. That's the problem. Is like we're sickos, right? Like it was like there wasn't like you didn't have like the Billy vibe of just like, oh, he's just like a little boy with his favorite cards and he's showing up to the game store. It was just like, nope, we're the playground bullies. Who am I gonna punch up today? Whose lunch money am I gonna steal? Like these were the Tide guys, like Mike Packer, Rich Shea. Same thing with the tax guys, like me, you, Mark Boat. They were showing up and they're stealing people's lunch money. Nobody wanted to protect that. Nobody was like, think of Mike Packer. He loves playing Replenish. You're going to take Replenish away from Mike Packer? Mike Packer's like, dude, take it away from me. I don't care. Like, I'll just go do something else. Like, I'm the bully, right? Like, I'm going to keep bullying y'all. Like, it has to be an underdog story. People's beloved decks need to have some form of antagonist. And it was really hard to be like, ugh, these elves guys are just bullying the Tide players. They're so mean to, like, they're just stopping the Tide players from being able to beat to beat elves. And that was specifically because Replenish clowned on elves without the use of Parallax Tide. But of course, Parallax Tide makes Replenish a deck, which at the same time, and like I think that this blue-white Tide control, Replenish and Dreadnought thing is what like made it too easy for the playground bullies to made it too easy for Goliath. I'm kind of starting to see the picture a little bit more clear with this analogy, because like I do think I agree with Andy Levine, which is just that like you can beat Tide decks. Everyone on this call agrees that you can beat Tide decks. We've seen it. But the like even though Replenish and Dreadnought are like sort of two different decks, in many ways they still just create the same sort of negative atmosphere, gravitational pull. Like they still kind of create this like vibe thing that's really plausibly hurting the experience of the people who are just kind of like came here to game kind of thing. So I can sort of buy it in that direction for sure. Mainly because it's just it would be simpler if it was just like, oh, play green decks or play green decks with good sideboard cards or play Enchantress kind of thing. And I do have to say the Enchantress evolution is brilliant, right? Because it looks really excellent against Dreadnought, Tide Control, and it can plausibly beat Replenish because it can put a Parallax Wave in play first.
Can I ask the gang something? So Lanny, you had stated that you are and correct me if I'm wrong, but that you were sort of method agnostic to your wins and losses.
Sure, yeah.
So just sort of thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's say I went Dark Ritual, Doomsday, and then I went like Fire Blast, Draco Blast you. Like totally just like 19 damage. You took a pain land, and I just like, boom, just got you. Or I can go Counterspell, Chain Tide. And in both cases, you have resolved 0 spells. Does this win and does this loss? Or rather, do you lost to both? Do these feel the same? Because in one of them, I'm like, dude, hell yeah! Like I hope you win. I want it. Yeah.
Right.
So
but that's exactly what I described, which is that we root for underdogs, right? And by identifying that the person doing the thing was an underdog, like we have more affinity to them. And I think it's like, my point about being agnostic to that is just like my goal is to like, win the tournament and whatever. And so like if I lose to Tide, that prevents me from my goal. And like, just as if I lose to random Doomsday, like that prevents me from like, so one example is actually quite simple, which is just that like, oh, these black mid-range decks are more fun, right? And they have more of this underdog status. And, like they're just another thing that I have to prepare for. Like people pulling random stuff out of the bag is just another thing that I have to prepare for. Like I go in with with more deck flexibility than, I guess everyone else on this call, except for I play lots of blue decks, right? And then Andy Levine just goes between his Doomsday.
I play every single. I don't know. I play any deck that doesn't run Mountain.
I do want to.
I play Mountain, right? So
I do want to exercise a little legalese here and call for a point of privilege.
Yeah.
And ask a sidebar for Andy here, because we're the two Tide sickos in the room, right? You look at this this ban announcement, and do you think anything else could have been done to solve the same problem?
Well, I don't know what the problem that we're trying to solve here is, because I think like there are fun play patterns by like the best decks. Like I think Earthpop is a good example. Like the line of Sphere into Wasteland or Port or whatever is similarly like I don't mind getting like LG'd when I'm not on the Tide side or whatever. Like I enjoy that that's part of the format. But I think that there's like many other similar play patterns that you're going to run into that will like now be deemed unfun, but have been like depressed perhaps because of Tide. So the Oath Ponza one being an example. I mean, like
it's the intersection. It's the intersection of like it's the intersection of all these things, though. Like I think that you are correct. Like I do think that like you can sort of identify each element of the anti-Tide argument and make a very reasonable case against, but you can't make the same case in all cases, right? So you kind of have to shift and be like, oh, well, Oath Ponza has the same unfunness. Like, whatever, like Frantic Storm has the same difficult, or maybe Iggy Pop has the same difficulty to interact with, or, whatever. Like you can go and be like, there are different decks that all do different things. And granted, there are different Tide decks that do different things, but it does feel like the case against Tide is like all of these things combined are hurting it. And I do think that it's not necessarily fair to the Tide haters to gotcha them on the like unfun play experience or like, you know, the whatever, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to describe, you know, again, a holistic experience of like this thing that they're doing.
But I think it's like the problem is that it's a bad play experience and it's the top deck or like the top space of decks. But like, there could be a world in 6 months from now that the top space of decks is again like some oppressive thing. Like,
there definitely will be. There definitely will be.
Or like miserable control decks to play against, like Sam's deck. Like,
Andy, the problem is not that there is not land destruction. I recognize that this is a feel bad and a cost, a sort of a maturity buy-in to the play experience of Premodern. It's that it was not the case that oops, we had fires and now it's fires Oath Ponza or fires Ponza, and like oops, we had elves and now it's elves Ponza, and we had Thalids and now it's Thalids.
Elves did add
Ponza.
some mana disruption to their deck. So.
A bit.
Right,
whereas the case with land still was it became Tide still, and replenish was like a million years ago Panda Burst replenish. Like oops, it's Tide replenish, and Dreadnought was Dreadnought, and now it's oops, it's Tide Dreadnought. So the same congealing effect of every deck just turn like oops, all Tide. It didn't have the same effect. Both Ponza, though a play experience.
Right, but I can imagine there being like oops, Weathered Wayfarer, Wasteland, Portlock.
Well,
show me when it happens. I'll unlock
I think I agree with both points. One is obviously this gravitational pull that's talked about in the article, and then the second thing, which is just that, like, you know, you can kind of talk about the different ways in which this kind of thing expresses itself, but you absolutely will always play the best cards that you can play in your deck. Like there are power outliers, like people are going to play them, like and it's just a question of how like interesting they are. And like I think that the one thing that we haven't talked about yet is the question of, do these unfun cards or strategies have to come with them deck building restrictions? And I think that that's like a big part of it, which is that if you want to play Oath or Survival of the Fittest or Phyrexian Dreadnought, even, I don't know, shrug, like those come with deck building restrictions, and the deck building restrictions for Replenish Tide Control, Dreadnought, and Blue-White Tide Control, like, you know, were not necessarily as
play Chain of Vapor, which is just a fine card to play already.
Yeah, that whole paradigm, I think, like, if unfun is coming up a lot as like a talking point, and one that carries a lot of weight when it comes to Premodern specifically. And when I was trying to figure out, like, how would you define fun if you were to use it as an argument sake, for argument's sake? And I think that the closest thing that I've been able to come up with is that the cards that are more unfun are the ones that implicitly require less risk to optimize. So the cards, like in Billy's analogy of, like, if I do this thing and then you do this thing back, there's implicit risk that you have to, like, and tension that is created by those decisions, where the cards that are the least fun are the ones that do the thing that feels bad, but then also requires the least amount of risk from the pilot.
Yeah,
like in order for me to actually do this thing, I don't have to incur any risk or concession, or like, so it's that tension, right? If you have to take a super high risk thing to do something that is supposedly unfun, that unfun thing, I think, like, becomes way more like, hell yeah, dude, you took that risk and it paid off. Yeah. As opposed to, oh, you took no risk. This thing, like, what do I even? I think that, like, that scale of risk is.
Even putting Dreadnought into play comes with some risk, and that is also talks on the angle of, like, the deck building expense of putting it in your deck. And I think that's like a super reasonable argument, and it's really just becomes a question of, like, okay, well, how powerful thing that is, right? Because obviously Swords of Plowshares has a very small deck building concession, but it also has a very small impact on the game when compared to it. So these are all super relevant things when we talk about whether or not something is a protected pillar, or like an experience that we're willing to protect versus not.
Yeah, I think the sliding scale, I think it's easier to like talk more pointedly about like what is the incurred risk or concession that this card requires, as
Yeah.
opposed to is this unfun? Because from my POV, like I found land tax to be a super fun card to play with, and others did not. But like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can
Sometimes
also
you
see
would
that,
like.
the,
Sometimes you would play land tax, but not play a land and try to trigger it, and then they would play a land and then blow it up, and then like that was that like risk vibe, or you would keep a hand that was just like plains land tax and they duress you, and then you'd had nothing, and then you actually just like lost the game on the spot type stuff.
yeah,
Like that's
but, like,
that
the
at
energy of land
least.
tax.
That at least is something that land tax did that Parallax didn't, and like the only problem was, all that said, putting it onto the battlefield and getting it to trigger still was not very risky.
Like the notion of like the if you go, okay, I have to cast like in Oath Panza, if you're like, I'm gonna cast this singular land destruction spell, you're like, I'm tapping out, doing this thing, and there's nothing else.
Well, it's also just not
with,
it's not powerful enough for us to care, right? Stone Rain is just not
exactly.
a powerful enough card. Like it is actually a feels bad card. Stone Rain is a card that is quote unquote banned from Magic when we talk about contemporary design principles, but it is not a powerful card even in contemporary Magic. And actually, same thing goes for like UU counterspell for the most part. In fact,
so, like the stuff that would catch the most heat are the ones that are on the scale like the most powerful, and also on the opposite end incur the least amount of risk for the pilot.
Yeah, Zach, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, so when we're talking about risk, and we have to eventually get to deck building risk, right? The cost of what it is to put a card into a deck and have it be effective, right? And now I'm not going to argue that Tide was high on the risk scale by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that what Martin Berlin was trying to do with this ban was to say, look, there are two specific issues in the format right now. The Parallax Tide deck is not fun. It's a one-sided Armageddon. That in and of itself is also a problem, just because it's very powerful, but it's also not fun, right? But on top of that, this ban will hit Dreadnought, which is a top deck in the format, and knock it down a peg or two as well, right? Now, I asked Andy this question before about what you would change if not Tide, because I think that the same problem could have been solved with lower impact by hitting Stifle. So if you hit Stifle, Dreadnought has to play like Reality Ripple, and Tide loses one of its two like combo things. What do you play? Boomerang now, so you need like to play Boomerang and Chain of Vapor. So I think that. You
can play the Seal of Cleansing Chain of Vapor combo. You have to play more white, and then you have to play a blue-white deck instead, which might make
Seal of Cleansing is much worse.
Exactly.
It's the analog Stifle, but
it's much worse.
Still much worse than
It's
Stifle,
much worse than Stifle. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
and I think also Stifle is a card that like doesn't see play anywhere else in the format aside from those two decks, right? Like no one's like, oh, I lost the bank on all these Stifles I bought.
I don't want to go too deep into this because I think that there are some brick walls that you run into with a pro ban Stifle thing, because there's just too many sort of like issues. One of them is just like how it looks on the ban list. The other is like you're curating with too much intention. There's not enough.
It is Wizards of the Coast take for sure.
It's like
the least amount to try and get a result. I do agree.
Yeah. So like I fully like, and it's just there's. It's just a little bit too out there. I really love the reasoning, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think that nerfing the Tide decks, nerfing the Dreadnought decks by banning Stifle is like a super reasonable, like, why don't we just do this? And like, it's really those like weird effects of banning in this way that either are aesthetically unpleasing or just don't make a lot of sense, or like, oh, are we gonna start trying to shave 5% here and 5% there off, like whatever? And it's just like, no, like, look, if you think something's good, you just gotta ban it and just like be like, like.
I mean, at the end of the day, I agree with the ban. I think the Tide. I think Tide was a fine choice. I'm super happy to see more diversity in the format, because this one thing that I feel like was truncating a lot of the deck building is now gone. So I'm excited to see what comes of it. Anyone can play armchair quarterback and say they should have banned this instead. At the end of the day, this is one man deals with this ban list. So it doesn't matter what I say at the end of the day, because this is what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to broadly say that I fully feel that a philosophical approach to the ban list being less about sculpting a metagame and more about lighting the fire and just seeing what happens is like, you know, is much more sort of sane and kind of supportable and you know has more long-term potential. But like, yeah, it would have been. It's too bad, right? It's too bad we can't. It's not too bad that we can't turn into old school, right? But it is kind of too bad that we can't really live in a world where it's just slam dunk, just like ban stifle, that actually solves several problems at once. It doesn't actually make too many people like particularly
Also, if it didn't
angry.
solve the problem, then you just have stifle and tide on the ban list later on. People are like, why is stifle here?
Ban tide on
it's like Troll of Khazad Doom in Legacy. People are just like, why is this here? If this is banned, like what is like that kind of thing.
Or like the third weird thing. I mean, you're right that stifle doesn't unlock some kind of crazy off the wall strategy, but like, yeah, you know, if you just ban it, you're like, oh, reality ripple dreadnought is actually horrible, and also, you know, blue white chain of vapor seal cleansing tide is also unplayable, and so actually you just basically just banned dreadnought and tide control and you left replenish behind, and it's like, okay, well, whatever. Like that's just kind of a whole thing.
Yeah, there's naturally like the type of card designs which are increasingly lost in modern philosophy, but the cards where you see it and you go, oh, what can I do with that, as opposed to a card that says, here's what you do with me.
Yeah.
The first one is always going to be the more exciting card to play with, and like if you were looking at exactly stifle and Parallax Tide tells you exactly what to do with it.
That's actually very funny you say that. I feel like, you know, the first level reasoning of that is just like Parallax Tide is like a flexible mana short, and then the creative solution, like as printed, it's a flexible mana short, and then the creative solution is to use the tide trick. But
yeah, if there wasn't like the printed design error of making it triggers,
knowing what we know now, it doesn't exactly work like that. I wanted to throw this out there. The reason why contemporary Magic design is both highly chaotic, some would say poisoned, some would say, you know, not like actually good, is the concept of fire. Fun, interesting, replayable, and I think exciting, but I feel like exciting is redundant to something, but whatever. Fun, interesting, replayable.
Fun and interesting and exciting are all the same thing, basically.
Yeah, hold on. Okay, fine. Somebody pull up. Oh yeah, fire.
Fun,
design.
inviting, replayable, and exciting.
Replaying. So exciting and fun are basically the same thing. Okay. So this is the sort of the creed of modern Magic design, which is just completely thrown it off the rails. It gave us all these horrible design mistakes, and yet at the same time, I fear that this should be the creed of good game design. These things are good to have in your game. These things are good in pre-modern. They're good in contemporary Magic. And in many ways, you want to think about how you can make pre-modern all of those things without adding new cards and new sets to it. And so I actually think there is a case to be made of using the ban list as a tool to make sure pre-modern has effectively enough fire. Now, this gets us into trouble, and this is kind of like basically my problem, which is just that like I think that pre-modern is all four of these things already. Like, why do we need to change it? But over the course of this call, generally speaking, I do think that the counterpoints to Tide have been made along the lines of it's unfun, it's not interesting, it's not inviting, unless it invites you to play it in all your blue decks. It's not replayable, it's a homogenized experience, and it's not exciting. Like, I just lost the game. It wasn't crazy Doomsday combo. It like wasn't one of the things. So in many ways we value fire, but in many other ways we are the refugees of fire corrupting contemporary design. So how are we going to maintain this balance between making our format as fire as possible, but not making the same mistakes as modern Wizards of the Coast? What you got, Billy?
I would like to make the distinction between, I think fire design principles are, it is a phenomenally good design assessment criteria. I think that it is super, super easy to fall into a trap about fire design because it was introduced alongside like
War of the Spark.
Yeah.
Unbelievable power creep, yeah.
Okay, so like power creep is a distinct phenomena from those things. Getting like chased out of your format by like incessant production schedules, getting turned off by like the fact that like every universe is beyond is an advertisement. It could be other things, but it is that definitionally. So fire design is conflated with so many other concepts that occurred contemporaneously with fire design.
Yeah. You can make the case that modern Magic simply has not effectively maintained the fire of Magic. Zach, you were going to add something?
Yeah. So I was looking, especially when you talked about fire, and we were, there's a risk of talking anachronistically about design because we're looking at pre-modern, right? But
I quick aside here. I wanted to say designing pre-modern, the box set, and the only design choices you can make is the band list, right? Is different than literally how the cards are designed.
Of course. So I thought about that, and then like, what is the opposite of fire, right? So if unfun, we'll start with unfun, right? We can't just do right?
Yeah.
So then inviting, the opposite of inviting would be gatekeeping, right? Like that's the best word I can really think of is
or just like repulsive,
Yeah.
Because gatekeeping has a lot of political baggage.
Replayable would be redundant, I think. Right.
Sure.
So the worst thing you can do is if you want something to be replayable, you're hoping that it's exciting when it's replayable and not redundant.
Stale.
Redundant. Stale is another good one. And then exciting, boring. Right. Like, so if you look at Parallax Tide, was it unfun? Was it gatekeeping? Was it redundant? And was it boring? I think the answer is yes for all those things.
Yeah.
As much fun as I had doing that to people, I like winning games. I feel the same way you do about that.
That was basically the point that I was saying, is that the case against Parallax Tide is a very fire-given case. But it is very difficult because I think that, pre-modern as a format, you can't analyze the individual cards on the basis of fire design because so many of the cards are not fire designed. Oath to Druids, Armageddon, Counterspell, and Phyrexian Dreadnought combo are all literally unfire, check in exactly the same way. So I don't think it makes sense as a criteria. That's why I was saying you need to think about the pre-modern box set as when you open up and pick it out of the box and you're sitting there and you're just like, well, this looks like a bunch of ways to torture my opponent. Like, which one am I going to choose? Is if the presence of Parallax Tide in the box makes the entire box not fun, not inviting, not replayable, and not exciting. Because all of the cards are those things, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely onto something. If you take a battle box and you add like a particular deck to that battle box and the whole thing just revolves around that deck, then what are we doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like SWB has his like 1999 extended battle box, and there are several Necropotence decks in those box. And let me tell you, I am not picking up the decks that don't have Necropotence in them, because why would I ever do that? Like, I can do that and my opponent can pick Burn or whatever anti-Necropotence deck. Like, I'm the one who's going to be having all the fun. So
anybody watching this is going to know that I'm the Stasis guy, right?
Right, yeah.
But Stasis doesn't do this. Is unfun and redundant as Stasis is, and probably boring and probably a bit gatekeepy, it does not warp the entire thing. So I think it's a great argument because you can't really say that this is
it doesn't ruin the box set.
Fire, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't ruin the whole box, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would point that the way that I think why pre-modern and a lot of the cards speak to people and are exciting in ways that the modern philosophy and the way they design cards now is that they're like, if you ever listen to Mark Rosewater's podcast where he talks about like design elements that they like undertake and what they learn from them, he talks a lot very often about how they'll get feedback from players and they'll do something, and then the players will be like, oh, they really don't like that, and so they just don't do that thing anymore. And whenever I hear him do it or talk about a lot of those things, I go, but dude, the whole function of that being fun in the first place is because there's the possibility of that other side.
Yeah.
So like when a card is like, hey, do this awesome thing, but if you fail to do that, you get to do this other awesome thing. So the result is that you're always going to get paid off in a way where the risk is just essentially the like bottom line is like I get to like replace itself or whatever. So like it just removes any costs that you have to like undertake or risk that you have to incur in order to optimize a thing.
We call this the up the beanstalk test.
Everything across the board. And so like then all the cards effectively do the same thing, which is we take no risks. There's no actually engaging play where there's any tension at all. And a lot of the stuff that like even the cards that are the like unfun power outliers in pre-modern, like if it's Oath or if it's Dreadnought, it's like, okay, well, Dreadnought has the component piece that even though it's the best thing to do, it still has the secondary component piece that you have to like apply and then execute in a way where there's like a bunch of intervening ways that somebody could interact or like try to interact or means of like, do you want to act with it on the stack? Do you want to act when it's on the board? Do you want to act before they even cast their spells? Like, and then Oath of Druids, like, yes, it's bottlenecky in that like I have to like maybe not play my creatures, but like then there's this holding pattern of like, okay, they can't actually do anything because they're built around Oath, which requires me to play a creature, but there's not a way for them to play a creature in a way. It's obviously more narrow than the other stuff, but like there's still some element of there is a tension that we have to build together as players across the table. And all of their fire design in modern day, it's like, hey, do this thing. And then also second paragraph, when you do that thing, you also get this payoff. And then when that payoff happens, activated ability that's 5 colors, pump your entire board. And it's just like, okay, well, if all the cards do all of the things, there's nothing for me to like imbue into that experience. Like I don't have any agency over, like, instead of the cards being designed in such a way where I get to figure something out, the cards are designed for the players that already want to do a thing and then just let them do it without having to think about it.
This is the I think the unique property that Tide has. So I accept the premise that mass land destruction is unfun because it is prophylactic. It stops people from doing their thing. This I concede freely. The unique property that Tide has is that it is mass land destruction that you can do from behind, and it is mass land destruction that occupies minimal deck space. So Armageddon, it's mass land destruction, but if I play an Armageddon while there's a bunch of goblins on board, I just screwed myself. I'm cooked.
Yeah. Well, let's not get
astute observation, actually,
Yeah.
Billy.
Yeah.
The fact that you said it can be done from behind is actually very, very important because I was going to say it's one-sided, but even better than being one-sided, you can do it from behind.
Yeah.
Yes. And alternatively, if I want to Stone Rain you out, then I've used a huge amount of deck space in my deck. I use in the Oath Ponza decks. I can't.
I think we're understanding. Like, I don't want to belabor some of the things that we've sort of already talked about. I know not everybody's a fan of things that you can do from behind, which is totally acceptable. So I want to shift the conversation. I think we actually did an exceptional job of talking, like in our first hour, of actually unpacking this, and I want to thank you guys all for that. And let's do the fun part where we make fools of ourselves by making predictions that will almost certainly be false. What do you guys think is going to happen next?
Oh, stasis. Stasis is the answer.
Next, in terms of like the meta game shift, or like next in terms of next band.
I'll leave it open. I'm done aggressively structuring our conversation. I just want to hear some of the vibes and I mean, what are you gonna do, man? Or like that kind of stuff. It sounds like Zach is gonna go play Stasis, gonna fire up in Magic Online League and just be like, "You guys thought that you weren't having fun. I will show you what not having fun looks like." But
I mean, if I'm going first here, well, this makes sense to just round robin it, right? I think I'll start with Stasis, but I do actually want to explore the Thawing Glacier space a lot more now that I can actually have multiple lands on the board and not worry about being like one-sided Armageddon. So I think I truly will be trying to discover if Thawing Glaciers is a card that can be put back into this format. So I'm super excited to try that out. What do I think is going to happen to the format? I think we're going to see more Dreadnought with the sideboard plan of either I'm not playing a sideboard plan. I'm just playing like random sideboard cards, or the pivot will be Brain Freeze.
Of course, yep. I mean, Dreadnought is going to stay, like, there's a lot of Tideless builds of Dreadnought, so it's absolutely going to keep Dreadnoughting. Andy, what do you have?
I'm excited to play nonsense. I'm definitely going to play some dumb decks at League. I think that there's going to be a lot of people that end up trying out bad decks because they think that it's free and like open to play bad decks, and then we'll realize that they're bad decks.
Are you going to bully those people or what?
With Lodestone Bobble, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you're one of those people too, actually.
No, I'm definitely playing something bad at League at least. But yeah, I don't know. I think those pods ends up being good. Or like until people adapt and get their Sabos webs and maybe Sacred Grounds or something along.
I want to drop
lines.
a quick aside on that. Oath Ponza used to be good against Mono Blue Tide, and then Mono Blue Tide stopped playing Standstill, and that's kind of where we ended up.
It wasn't
that, right?
Well, sure. Yes.
Yeah.
I guess I play tested a lot for Lobscon 2024 against SWB because he was on Oath, and like it felt like a pretty good matchup, but I also wasn't running Standstill.
Yeah. Okay. Phil, what you got?
Oh, sorry. One other thing was I think we're not going to see the resurgence of like Rifter or some of these other decks that still fold to land destruction.
Yeah, they're still getting bullied.
That people think are back is the kind of the summary.
Phil?
Yeah, if it's just off of where Parallax Tide went, I expect there to be more things like what Zach is talking about of thawing glaciers, just like more experimentation with that sort of thing. And so I'm going to reach for back to basics.
All right. Billy?
I have no predictions. I
No.
Okay.
Stake something on something. We are saying things. We are making takes here. There are no takes.
Okay, fair. I think that red is going to perk up a bit.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have a bit more sideboard space where they don't have to just just play 8 blasts or whatever they're up to. I don't know. I don't play those decks. So red's going to perk up a bit. And probably in response, I don't know. I'm excited to see the control decks diversify. I'm gonna say red perk gets. I think summer 2026 is gonna be the season of red. How about that?
All right. LobsterCon mountains back on the menu for LobsterCon.
Yeah,
not just for triggering.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's your take.
Mountain unbanned.
Yeah, here's
red summer.
Interesting stuff, because I feel like Dreadnought has an effect on this, but I will give my take. Dreadnought, no more tides in the sideboard. Basically not a problem. In fact, I think that the most progressive Dreadnought players had sort of identified that Tide wasn't what they wanted to do, because Tide was meant to bully Oath Ponza and Replenish. And people stopped playing Oath Ponza and Replenish. And you can't play Replenish anymore. That's my other take. I don't think people will play blue-white Replenish that just puts back Opal Wave. I think that Tide was a very important facet of that deck, and I think that an optimal design is going to be something that I can't fully predict. It'll be fun to brew around, a Replenish deck that loots, but I certainly don't think that Opalescence and Parallax Wave is better than, like whatever else. But yeah, I saw that the Dreadnought players, Raska is basically a genius, and he did basically from the point that he built the Tide deck, he stopped putting Tide in the sideboard because he understood that his role as a deck innovator is exploiting and finding angles and pushing, and he pushed past Tide, and I think that Dreadnought easily pushes past Tide. Whether or not it's a weaker deck overall, certainly debatable. It definitely hurts the deck that now you know that you're never getting tided. It allows you to do things like
you don't have to play around the pivot anymore, which is
it's huge. Because Brad, you're not meddling mage naming Tide if you're Brad in the finals of Sacred Torch anymore. So that was a huge equity thing.
Do you think there's that non-mono blue Dreadnoughts become the better deck to play? Like blue-white or blue-black?
Gun to my head, no, because basically the Flash of Insight, Brain Freeze deck solves like had sort of solved the mono removal problem. And so like the deck needs to have a different answer, and like Disenchant and Armageddon aren't really good answers to the Ponza decks. I have I think that blue white was really excellent in the metagame, you know, like when it kind of felt like Swords to Plowshares was like a thing that enough people were doing. And this is kind of going into just regular old podcast territory, but we're like not a very Swords to Plowshares format anymore. Like the best decks basically don't play it, or don't play 4 copies. So I found that to be an interesting development. But yeah, I think that people will experiment with blue white or blue black, but I do think that like the current like mono blue deck that just, you know, either the one that has thwart or the one that just has AKs and does things like is really good. I like brewing around Dreadnought with a control pivot that has Armageddon or Psychotog in the sideboard, that kind of thing. That's going to be fun. Will it be optimized and be the weapon? Hard to say. Like the 2 Dreadnought builds right now, either like thwart or, you know, whatever, just you could play Deep Analysis and you can get your card advantage back against Black range type stuff, or AK, that kind of stuff. Like those have so much inertia, so it's hard to break into that. Moving on to Replenish, I think that blue-white Replenish, very surprised if I see that still. Like I'd be very, very surprised if you are trying to cast Attunement in the future. So thank you, Andy, for the slabbed Attunement. But
it can stay in the slab.
It's staying in the slab. We're not cracking that. And as far as second order effects of Replenish being less like this deck. So Elves and Enchantress were 2 decks that were really bullied by Replenish, as well as other survival decks. Do those decks get necessarily better? Anybody have thoughts on that? I think that they're probably...
Survival decks were already good against
Tide.
Like
they really were. But now they just like...
A lot of that, I think, will come from the share of the metagame that was bullied by Replenish, like getting to come in and then actually experiment. So I think it's like harder to say if they like if they get better, or if other things that were never even on the radar to begin with that they would have to contend against because, you know.
There could be like a weird thing. I mean, so one of the things is that having one fewer deck that can establish Opal Wave, like, so basically people had started turning on Wave, and there's sort of like this fundamental thing, which is just that if your creature deck isn't a creature combo deck like Goblins or Elves, like somebody putting a Parallax Wave into play is just really, really oppressive, because then they stop everything that you're doing and they follow it up with Opalescence. But now that they can't really do it until turn 3 if they're ramping, and it's just less likely. I played some Enchantress. It's hard to get Opal Wave out, like, you know, under pressure. There is a question of if your regular old beatdown decks are back on the menu. Like a lot of these, like white weenie, black weenie, 5-color weenie, sliver, red green beatdown type decks, definitely hated to see Replenish coming, but it's so hard to say that like they're going to improve that much when people just weren't playing Replenish that much.
I think
it's a tertiary effect. Oh, go on.
My thing's quick. I was just going to say that it's the threat of it, right? Like even if they didn't play against Replenish, they still had to calculate Replenish in their
right. They're much less likely to like win the literal tournament, because they're just like, Lanny's going to show up, Packer's going to show up, Richey's going to show up with Replenish, and so I kind of can't do this thing. I have to play.
Of what,
yeah. And then mono blue Tide Control and blue white Tide Control, man, I really don't know. I actually just didn't play against these decks that often, and when I did, it didn't. I personally didn't really. Like, I was already not interested in playing the Rock or Black-White Control, even though I'm a Rock influencer since the beginning. But I was, like, never really interested in that. Like not the least of which, but because there was Tide. But I just expect people to still be casting, like, Fact or Fiction, which I really hate to see coming.
my favorite story about how powerful Mono Blue Tide is at last LobsterCon, our friend Tim literally died the night before. Yeah. And then came back to life and XO'd with Mono Blue Tide. Yeah. So... like that, and then
I had to pull all of my 30-plus-year-old Boy Scout knowledge to like keep that dude alive until the ambulance came, and then the next day he just like got, like effortlessly made it to the top 8. I think part of that was the amount of liquidation from the IV that he got. He's just super hydrated and ready to go.
I mean, there you go. That's the secret. Just lose consciousness, just die. But then you get the drip, and you're unstoppable, man.
Dude,
Tide and IV.
It came in like the Terminator.
Yeah, 100%. For people who want to hear more about that story, that is somewhere in the Spike Colony podcast feed. It's like a bonus mini episode after LobsterCon. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, like this black mid-range thing or this mid-range thing in general or this control thing in general, like it's very interesting if we'll see more of that. Like, I think that people are definitely going to initially just like, flood the airwaves with their Enchantress decks. Well, that's the other thing is like, so if everyone's just going to play Enchantress, then I still don't really want to play like a mid-range deck because my opponent is still going to draw 100 cards and I'm still going to lose.
I think that the decks that
pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was saying decks that don't have like a ton of baked in card draw will get a lot better. Because a lot of the ways that if you were able to overcome Tide, a lot of the way that you did it was because you were resource rich, and so you could sort of rebuild after the fact if you weren't dead. And the decks that were just like, I don't have a bunch of card draw to build that kind of resources, just are like tapped out. And those decks not having to deal with that, I think, do get a boon. Whether or not they become actually prominent or good, to be seen. But I think that they it is a bright light for them.
Yeah.
I also think that even before this ban, Graveyard Hate was severely underplayed in the format. And I think like there's going to be more decks that utilize the Graveyard, not necessarily like Reanimate or Full Out, like that type of deck, but decks that care about the Graveyard. And I would expect Phyrexian Furnace to become a better card.
Yeah. To the survival point, I think in the short term, survival is going to get a little bit worse because the strength of the card is based on the specificity of silver bullets. So in Corned Beef Hash, I was winning some games by setting up like Safekeeper Xantid Swarm, and I got a lot of equity out of that, specifically to be tied. But now I don't like, what's the metagame? Who knows? So I'm not going to get those free wins.
I predict that survival will be really good in this new metagame, assuming that like still really good, even if it was like good against Dreadnought. Yeah.
6 weeks from now, I think it's going to be sick. But in the
which flavor of survival? Which survival? I haven't played survival much.
Yeah.
Like,
good question. I still think that it is elves. I think elves is still just a really amazing deck that is expensive and people don't play it, and I don't think it's actually that hard. Just put Deranged Hermit into play, guys. You don't have to overthink it. Make sure it has haste if you need that kind of thing. Also,
the influx of crop rotation for once people realize they can play with 8 cradles, it gets a lot better too.
I think that is a hot take, and that was the Snap Cradle Pop thing. I mean that's an awesome deck. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's weird because I'm just like it's not really a deck that I was just like dying to build that I didn't build because of Tide, but that's just because of me personally. Like I guess I didn't even consider cards. I mean, I think that like cards that cost a lot of mana are still very difficult to play. And yeah, I think one of the things we're seeing in chat is just like, oh, Pernicious Deed stonks are up. So
laughable.
Yeah.
I think that you will see the like full English breakfast style deck come back out and possibly Rexer again.
Okay, nobody's playing HFEB online. The Rexer deck was good against
online now, right?
Good against Tide. It is fixed online, yeah. HFEB is fully fixed and people didn't really play it. And then Rexer...
Yeah, the Rexer deck was great against Tide.
Yeah, it was great against Tide Control. It was horrible against Replenish, and I guess 50-50 slightly favored against Dreadnought, depending. I mean, I think the problem was pilots were casting Duress on turn 1. That's neither here nor there. Yeah,
it's so hard to not, though. You just want to know what's going on.
Yeah,
very hard to lose.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm having a tough time, I think, because I think that like it'll just be like, yeah, I don't know, man. I feel like we're gonna all sit down at the same table. Everything is just gonna be on the menu except for no more duck confit, I suppose, or no more duck at all, right? There's 3 ways to prepare it, and that's just not on the menu anymore. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that we kind of see some action. We see color combinations in Terravor that we have never even conceived of. I hope Esper Bobs becomes the new oppressive blue like deck. I hope that we see.
What's that card that only lets like 10 lands be in play?
Yeah,
Impending Doom.
Is that
is that limited resources?
limited resources?
No,
right?
yeah, well, limited resource. I'm thinking.
Isn't Impending Doom the one
red
that
enchantment.
upkeep it blows everything up? Like it's an upkeep Armageddon.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean Global Ruin Domain. I really hope. I mean, okay, I'm back. I'm back.
Murpho told me
We're
that.
playing Domain. Yes. We had Sacred Ground in our Domain sideboard, and it was still not good enough. But now I'm going to be like Lay of the Land, Sacred Ground, laugh in Billy's face, Global Ruin, pick up those non-basic lands.
Oh,
I hope you do.
You're making me think. You want to know the worst part about Parallax Tide is that Teferi's response didn't work against it.
Okay.
No,
You're right about that.
A very little amount of work against it.
I mean, you might draw lands in addition to the one that you saved. You are
Nothing
right
more
that
deflating than being like, yes, Teferi's response.
I
the
think-
exact tool made for this type of thing.
I do think that a
when
good
it
half
was an
measure should have been.
interrupt,
Yeah, I think
It
a
worked.
good half measure should have been. No, it doesn't work as an interrupt. You can't Crozen Grip the Tide either. But
No, but when interrupts were actually a thing, when like they could not respond to it again.
no, but it doesn't. It still doesn't work because you put all 5 on the stack holding priority. We had the
yeah.
Crozen
No,
Grip
yeah,
thing.
never mind.
Or
You can't
and
cross
then
it.
after it dies, it would be the stifle.
Yeah, you Crozen Grip the thing. So I do think maybe the change should have been just nobody talked about it. We should have just errata Teferi's response to say, or cards named Parallax Tide, draw 5 cards, or here's the errata,
put any number
counter
of lands in
any
play.
number of spells or abilities that target a land you control. There
That
you
are
go.
on the stack.
Mind break, trap. Teferi's response was the answer. I actually had a crazy take that I woke up this morning and I wanted to drop this in Wild Speculations. I'm like, guys, ban Hydroblast and Blue Elemental Blast. So then blue decks can't beat red decks anymore, and we actually have a metagame. But
I mean, that goes right along with your what if Stifle was on the ban list? How would that look?
exactly. People who boot up the ban list are like, I can't play Blue Blast, but I can play Red Blast. Like, what kind of format is this? Like, what kind of bullshit is
I don't
this?
think that blue decks will still beat red decks. They just run Essence Flare and chill.
I mean, I think that it's nice because now you can red blast those cards when you couldn't because your red blast would get blue blasted. I was like playing a lot of Psychotalk and I would just be like, Psychotalk. They'd be like, blast it. I'm like, blast your blast. G. Like, that's the deal. But, I think that it's, I mean, we're living in a tideless world. I think we did a great job here. Is there and I also, I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. Shout outs, Zach and Phil, Eternal Durdles, thank you so much. Billy, Hardcast, Duress Crew, we're cooking it up. LobsterCon, brand new meta, brand new data, Magic Online. Honestly, I gotta shout out Mr. Hodge for just keeping everybody on top of what's going on Magic Online, keeping the results flowing, keeping the spreadsheet going. People then using, his spreadsheet to make their own spreadsheets and get into this kind of thing. I didn't really fully read all of it, but we have data. There's limitations to the data, but at the end of the day, the concept of the winner's metagame, I guess I have to give it up to that kind of thing. But I don't want to circle back too much. Shout out to you guys. Thank you so much. I think everyone was super reasonable, much better than the ban land tax thing, which went a little crazy because I was a younger guy
Shouldn't
back
have been
then.
banned. That's why.
All right, let's
waiting for it.
reopen
I
the
was waiting for it.
discussion. So now let's unban land tax. All right. what else? What else we got? What else we got? Anybody that needs to be shouted out? Any events coming up? Bearded Dragon.
I got one.
25th.
I got one.
Rochester Winter Ball stuff. Winter Regional.
I got one.
Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. So Grand Rapids, Michigan, has a nascent and junior pre-modern scene. They're just kicking it off. So if you're in Michigan, if you're in the Midwest, they're not a old growth forest yet. So if you would like to plant some saplings in Grand Rapids, you can play at Galactic Toys and Games on February 1st.
Excellent. Did the regional sign up go up this weekend or is it next weekend?
It happened 2 hours and 23 minutes ago.
Did it cap? Because it caps.
It was real close when I signed on.
Okay, cool. It's definitely capped now. All the guys who weren't going to go because people were going to play Tide just freaking like, I'm in. That's what happened. That's hype. I mean, that's going to be the first major, as I like to call them, post-Tide ban. So it's going to be hype. All right, 42-minute sellout per Nick. So
there is...
the banning mid-reg, yeah, it's pretty funny. You're just like register for the tournament. It's just like the card gets banned. It's hype.
It's a bit away from now, but on
Sheesh.
February 28th there is a 1K at Top Deck Games, which is near my neck of the woods in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
All right, let's go. Are you close to Bearded Dragon? Should we make the 25th happen, or no?
Me, I'm not. I don't drive, so I am not essentially
okay.
not close to Bearded Dragon. Even though I suppose, but as the bird flies, it's like 40 minutes from me.
Yeah.
However, there's no train to the Bearded Dragon.
All right, I'll pick you up. Sounds good. Cool. Well, great job, y'all. That was fun. I think. Andy, are you happy or sad? Tell Anton if you're happy or sad.
I'm happy. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zach's happy.
Yeah, I'm hyped.
Phil's happy. You guys talked about it on your video, so you kind of were already pro ban.
Yeah,
we know Billy's
basically
happy.
locking in for another like half an hour after this.
Yeah. The content train must go. You'll have to show me how to publish our stuff in 2 feeds at the same time. Yeah. And then Billy's happy. Me, well, look, if you guys are all happy, then fine. I want you guys
I don't think
to
it should have been down, but like I think this is gonna be I like a new meta. And I realistically don't play Tide at leagues that often, so like
because you don't like bullying people. You don't like bullying your friends. Unlike SWB, who has no mercy. He's just like, fuck you guys. I'm taking my points. Like, let's go.
I find that I have way more fun when people are like, "You're doing something cool," and maybe winning a little bit. Versus like you're just winning and doing the thing that everyone else is
you're
doing.
a real ethical bully. You like it when the kids are just like, at least my lunch money is getting spent by a creative swell guy. Yeah. So
I mean, if I'm stunting on people with stasis, I'm having a great time. But like no, I mean, if this is the one format you can do that, no one's like you're the worst.
Oh,
Speaking
people
of
still
stasis,
do that.
Lanny, tell Zach why Black Vice is actually bad.
Oh, it doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything, Zach.
It does
nothing.
You already have a card that you have a lot of cards that don't do anything, so it's just another card that doesn't do anything. I mean, obviously,
no, it does nothing.
Obviously, yeah, it does nothing. Yeah.
The Seinfeld magic cards.
Yeah, I mean, you guys. I mean, I'm on the anti-duress crusade recently. I've just been like stirring pots by saying like you should just cut duress from every like
full on encroach, ostracized. Is that what you're saying?
No, just full on. Don't play discard, man. Like, why play discard when you can play counter magic when you can play cantrips? Like, you can draw cards.
You're combo deck.
Yeah,
like you want your duress in your combo deck.
Yeah, you want duress in your combo deck. Yeah. Unless it's
the what's it called? Yeah. Phil, the asymmetry of knowledge, right?
Yeah. Well, that's
knowledge asymmetry is so powerful. It's
overrated. I already know what's in your hand. I already know.
But there's a whole podcast to be talked about that. Like the whole idea that
all right. And recording, re-record. Welcome to the Spy Colony podcast. Here we're gonna have a round table on whether or not we should play Wandering Eye in all of our blue decks, a la Finkel. All right.
I would do for Field of Dreams in this format, I tell you.
Yeah, well, you've got telepathy, so give that a run if you like it so much. Zer's Weirding, hello. let's go. Duress users, weirding, protected, G effing G. Back on the menu, thanks to Tide. Iggy Pop, I forgot. Sincerely, Iggy Pop question, still on the menu, back on the menu.
Oh, Iggy Pop's totally real. It's totally real.
Super real. Cool. Awesome. All right.
Doomsday's dead if it's a red summer.
Doesn't it just die to a foil?
Yeah. But the Iggy Pop people are hard at work figuring out a way to beat that. And now
Defense
that they
grid.
don't have to worry about Parallax Tide, they can maybe beat it with a spell that costs greater than 2 mana. So, love to see it. But yeah, realistically, they just play 10 Orm's Chance, and that's their strat. So, hype. Frantic Storm. Oh my God. Frantic Storm back on the menu. Yeah. I forgot to shout out Anton for that one. I'm pretty in. I actually, oh no. I'm so in on Frantic Storm. Okay, fine. The Tide ban was okay. It's fine. You guys can have it. You guys can have it because I get to have Frantic Storm. Zach gets to have Stasis. Andy always had Bobble. Tide doesn't change that. Yeah, control mid range. We'll see. But that's hype. Thank you. Love you. Do we I'm in the middle of a league. Do I finish it? Like, what's the point of continuing to play a league if
you have to say that you
play
won
it
the
out one
final
more
league.
time, man?
Yeah.
So, yeah, play it. Yeah, everybody's just swarming into Magic Online, playing their last Tide.
Yeah, you gotta
last
give
shit
Tide a
out of
proper
Nom.
send off.
Yeah. Oh my God. No, thank you. I would rather play the current pre-modern format.
I will
and
wait
not
2 days.
Yeah, and not the one. Yeah, not the one. Like, we push forward. We're forward thinking here. Love of the game, exactly. Billy, what you got? Last call.
I wish somebody had come up with the secret sauce. I think that I put so much time and so much thought into this. Like, I can splash black for duress abeyance. That just totally cooks them. Or and I think the it's a hollow victory. But
it would have been nicer. It would have been nicer if we could have bullied Tide back down to less than the amount of metagame. I fully agree, and I think we were sort of trying to do that, and I think that there was inklings of that. I think that the Enchantress innovation was super great, but yeah, I fully agree. I think you and I are on the same page, and it was just a question of what our tolerance threshold was for at what point are we going to say enough is enough. I was quite far from that threshold. Many people were quite far past it. So, at the end of the day, like I said, I'm happy you guys are happy. And, we still are going to keep doing what we're doing. Yeah, I guess I hope nobody bought them for, it's just such an awkward, I hope nobody bought them for $50 or whatever BS. That's
side thing. If anybody has thoughts on the ban, but doesn't have a podcast, hit me up at ForceFill on any social, and I'll publish you on EternalDurdles.com with any of your thoughts.
Yes. Same here, but I won't publish you. I'll just read it and tell you what I think. No, just send all of it to Eternal Durdles. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys. I feel honestly, I'm so glad we got on the horn right away, because I feel like any kind of negativity that I felt was just immediately evaporated, because I'm just reminded about how awesome it is to have people like y'all in the community and have chats like these. And so,
right back at you, man.
It's Premodern is going to be resilient no matter what. It's going to take more than a random banning of a card to necessarily destroy it. So, at the very least, I have faith in our institutions. So let's go.
Well
love
said.
Spike Colony, love Eternal Durdles, and love Duress Crew.
Bye, guys.
Catch you.